Good morning, everyone. Welcome once again to SIR. We're going to start with our announcements. First of all, we have our SIR social that has been helping so many people. We have been able to pay rent, pay groceries for people who are struggling at this time during the pandemic. So we have our website on the screen for donations, or you can call Marilia for English, 678-448-7826. Or if you want to speak in Portuguese, you can call Walkyria. Spiritist Radio, as always, we like to remind that we have content, Spiritist content, 24/7 in English, 24 hours a day, 7 days a week in English. We have an updated app for iOS coming up in the next few days or so. And we're also going to have a new program called Action and Reaction Study. So please check our website and expect that iOS app coming soon. Now we're going to go through our initial prayer, followed by the gospel reading. We'd like to thank you, God, Supreme Intelligence, cause of all things, for helping us, for supporting us, for inspiring us to be here today and study together. We ask you to bless everyone that is watching us today, their families, their friends. Bless all the workers of our Spiritist Center, their families, and their friends. We ask you that you inspire today's speaker to help us understand the concepts that we brought to us. So be it. The Gospel according to Spiritism, Chapter 5, Blessed are the afflicted, Item 20, Happiness is not of this world. I am not happy. Happiness wasn't made for me. People of every social position generally explain. This, my dear children, proves better than any possible reason the truth of this maxim from Ecclesiastes. Happiness is not of this world. Indeed, neither wealth, power, nor even the flower of youth are the essential conditions for happiness. I would say more, not even the combining of these three much desired conditions are since we constantly hear persons of all ages, the most privileged class be complaining about their situation. Right. So, once again, good morning, everyone. We have a special guest, Sonia Doi. She's a medical doctor, PhD. She's currently serving president of the Allan Kardec Spiritist Society in Maryland, the U.S. Spiritist Medical Association, and the International Spiritist Medical Association. Sonia, welcome. We're very happy that you're here with us today.
Thank you so much. It's an honor to be with you. I really thank you all for the invitation. Good morning to all of you who are following us on this broadcast. And I'm very happy that I have the opportunity to be with you all. So let's share the content. Yeah, let me see if I can get it. Okay. So the topic, can you all see it? Johnny, can you just make sure that is in the presentation mode? There we go. Okay, so the topic that we're going to talk about today is Spiritist revelations that preceded scientific findings. And there are so many that we cannot put all in 1 hour, but I just thought about bringing something that is more exciting and that we have more proofs in science. So that, to cover some of that, we're going to start with Kardec, mainly Genesis, where Kardec describes the creation of the universe, the role of comets, the cosmic fluid. Then we're going to go through the books of Francisco Xavier by the Spirit André Luiz, and talking specifically about the pineal gland, which is also called epiphysis, the triune brain, the cellular structure, and the spirit. So those are the outlines of the talk for today. I like to start with this slide because it brings one of Kardec's statements that is so important to us. It says, Spiritism and science complement each other. Science without Spiritism finds itself utterly powerless to explain certain phenomena by laws of matter. Spiritism without science would lack support and corroboration. That's in Genesis, which was, by the way, published in 1868. But then, almost 10 years later, Einstein wrote the following quote: "Science without religion is lame," which means crippled. "Religion without science is blind." And I joke that, if Einstein have read Spiritism, he would probably say, instead of religion, he would say Spiritism. But so this is what Kardec means. Spiritism and science complement each other. And he says more. He says Spiritism goes together with science, and when science stops and can no longer explain phenomena by the material laws, Spiritism goes beyond and explains it. So let's see a little bit about the formation of the universe. There's so much there. You must read it. I'm so so elated with reading. When I read for example, chapter 6 of Genesis, that is about the creation of the universe. And then I go into the NASA website or the astrophysics websites, and I see that now they're discovering things that Kardec already described. So let's see a little bit of those. And I always I apologize for bringing so much, written words, but Kardec writes in a way that is so beautiful, almost poetic and instructive, that if we try to put our words, it won't be fair. So he says, masses of cosmic matter are found everywhere, isolated in space like islands in a vast archipelago. So matter is found everywhere. Keep this. Beyond this wilderness, splendid oases float in the limpid ether and incessantly renew beautiful scenes of activity and life, meaning there is activity and life much beyond what we see. There, in the faraway distance, are displayed aggregations of cosmic substance, utterly beyond the range of the telescope through the transparent regions of our heavens. Genesis chapter 6. And he's talking beyond the range of telescope. At that time, there was not even Hubble. And he goes, now I brought here something that I read in the scientific observations, and this is 100 years after Kardec, 1968. And it says, intergalactic space is the physical space between galaxies. The huge spaces between galaxy clusters are called the voids, meaning nothing, that have much lower density, at least in terms of visible matter. However, even deep vacuum of intergalactic space is not devoid of matter, as it contains a few hydrogen atoms per cubic meter. So this is 1968, way back, right? And this is the concept that they have there, meaning that they believe that there is matter, there are some hydrogen atoms, but they don't see much matter in there. It's a void. It's a big empty space. But now we have to see this. This was published now, 2020. Astronomers find missing matter, solving decades-long mystery of outer space. When everybody thought that in between galaxies, there was an empty space. Somebody theorized that there's matter there. Kardec already said that way beyond before, but the scientists had the idea of using radio bursts. So they put in orbit a huge device that emits radio waves. And with that, they could actually see or measure the matter that was actually crossing or coming against the radio waves. It is beautiful. If you go to the website or if you read this, you can see they even have like a little movie that I could not import to show you. But but what they say is, it's interesting the way they put it. What we're talking about here is what scientists call baryonic matter, which is the normal stuff that you and I are made of, meaning matter. We are going to see later when we talk about fluidic matter that must be equivalent to what he's talking about here. So this was the scientist from this center where they used the radio waves to do this experiment, and this was published in a journal that's one of the most regarded in science. Is the Nature journal. Was published now in 2020. 2020. So see how things that Kardec said published actually in 1868 are being corroborated now. So let's go on to the cosmic fluid. And Kardec says, again, chapter 6, the cosmic fluid, which penetrates bodies, is like an immense ocean spread everywhere. In it resides the vital principle which gives birth and life to beings, perpetuating it upon every globe according to its condition. We know that the vital principle, the fluid, the cosmic fluid, undergoes some adaptations, some changes depending on where it's spread, depending on the physical conditions of the globe. And then there's science. And this, I think, some of you may have heard. It was in 2005, was a big, made the news. There's a large experiment center called the Large Hadron Collider that lies in a 17-mile tunnel in circumference as deep as 574 feet beneath the Franco-Swiss border near Geneva. And in this huge place, they had a particle accelerator, and they accelerated 2 gold ions at the speed very close to the speed of light. So they accelerate these gold ions one against the other, expecting that when they would collide, they would release the very small particles that were within the smallest particle that we could have ever seen. But within this particle, there were even smaller particles that they could never separate. So they thought maybe by colliding them, we can get them to separate. So they did this experiment. And they were expecting that out of this experiment, if they were successful to burst this little package of small particles, the particles would explode and go everywhere like a gas because of so much energy that would be released. And instead of that, these small particles that they call quarks were really released, but they behaved like a perfect fluid. And this was a surprise to all the scientists who did this experiment. And here is what, at that time, they published. The American Physical Society in April 2005 wrote, a new form of matter was discovered, the plasma quark gluon. Gluon are small particles that keep the quarks together. And Dr. Samuel Aronson, director of the Brookhaven Laboratory, that commanded this, that was on the head of this experiment, said, and these are his words, this material is presumed to have permeated the universe during the first microseconds after the Big Bang. Then it cooled down and differentiated into an infinitude of particles in all matter that exists currently. So let's see what Kardec has said. There is an ethereal fluid which pervades space and penetrates all bodies. The fluid is the primitive cosmic matter, generatrix of the world and beings. Primitive cosmic matter comprises the material fluid and vital elements which unroll the magnificence of all the universe throughout eternity. Do you see similarities between these two? I see it. And I was really fascinated when they released this, because when I put it together side by side, it's almost like, maybe words a little different, but the concept was the same. By releasing those particles, they found what they call the fluid matter and the cosmic matter. It's like we were looking at a phenomenon that occurred in the universe more than 13 billion years ago. When the universe was created. So this was really fascinating, but let's go a little further. And the other part that is fascinating is when Kardec talks about comets. When I read, Genesis on comets, I thought, comets, like, they are just a ball of ice. and Kardec says, comets are wandering stars. They guide us beyond the limits of our solar system, carrying us into the faraway regions of the sidereal space. They have traveled in successive journeys from sun to sun, enriching themselves sometimes on their route by planetary fragments reduced to a vaporous state, bringing to their focuses the vivifying and renovating principle that they cast upon terrestrial bodies. So what he's saying here is that comets are like delivering elements in the universe. They go through atmosphere of different planets, different systems. They pick up material here and they keep on traveling and they deliver to other places. It's fascinating, but at that time I thought, I never heard of anything like this. Well, in 2004, NASA published this. NASA scientists have discovered a new class of organics in the comet dust captured from Comet Wild 2. This was done by the NASA's Stardust mission spacecraft. So they had a spacecraft that crossed through the tail of a comet and collected material, and they found organic matter, believe it or not. And they say more primitive than any material found in meteorites. Scientists believe that these organics may represent some of the original material used to build everything in our solar system, including life on Earth. And they go on saying life on Earth may not have been possible without comet strikes. Isn't that interesting? And then in 2018, they published this paper, which is called Galactic Panspermia, meaning it goes everywhere. Comets and asteroids may be spreading life across the galaxy. So it's really interesting because you go back into what Kardec said in Genesis, and it's exactly that. So a little bit over Kardec. Now let's go on to some of the books by Francisco Cândido Xavier and André Luiz. And now we're going to go a journey from talking about the pineal gland and going all the way to the mind and how the spirit connects with the cells and the mind. So the pineal gland, which is also called the epiphysis, was first found by the Greek physician and philosopher Claudio Galenus. And this was 130, he lived around 130 to 210 BC. So he was the first to describe the pineal gland, which is a very small structure, 5 to 8 millimeter. He describes as like a grain of rice. And this name pineal or conarion, which is the translation to Greek, is it's about the shape of it, which reminds of pine. What do we call pine? Not seed, but anyway, you know what I meant. Later, René Descartes, who lived in 15 to 1600s, declared that the pineal gland was the seat of the soul, responsible for mechanisms that regulate the precise function of the human body and manifestations of passions and even mental dysfunctions. So he populated this idea that the pineal gland was actually was able to manifest the soul. But his idea got discredited, and people got after in the 19th century, there was more like a somatization of mental disease, meaning the mental diseases are not coming from any alterations of the soul or the mind, but were actually physical. And here on the top left, you see the structure of the brain and where the pineal gland sits. This is very small, and it's almost like it's almost perfectly at the center of the brain if you actually kind of make lines crossing vertical and horizontal. So let's see what André Luiz said about the pineal gland in Missionaries of the Light, which was published in 1945. In chapter 2, André Luiz says, the pineal gland secretes psychic hormones or power units which act positively on generating energies. And when he says the pineal gland secretes psychic hormones, at that time, nobody knew that the pineal gland was something that was there. Nobody knew much of the function, much less that the pineal gland would secrete any hormone. Well, only in 1958, the melatonin was discovered. And melatonin is the hormone that is secreted by the pineal gland. So when this was scientifically discovered, Now the pineal gland became, the pineal structure became a gland, because before it was not considered a gland. Gland is a structure that produces hormones. So before it was just an organ there, but nobody knew much about the function. Now in 58, it becomes a, a gland, because it was shown that it produces hormones. And this was exciting to all of us spiritists and scientists, because when we look into this, we say, wow, André Luiz told us that much earlier, 1945, more than 10 years earlier. So this discovery preceded science, but 10 years. And then some of our colleagues who are spiritist doctors published an article that was published here in the United States. And that is very important, because if you publish an article in a journal in other countries that are not, United States or England, or some countries that publish in English, these articles don't go don't reach many people. So when it's published here in the United States by a peer-reviewed journal, meaning there is a committee that judges whether this article is credible or not, then this becomes a very important step. And this was a very important step that our colleagues from the Spiritist Medical Association in Brazil published, and in Neuroendocrinology letter in 2013. In this article, they actually describe that André Luiz, through Francisco Xavier, talked about the discovery of melatonin. So this is a very, very important step for us. Then in Evolution in Two Worlds, André Luiz talks about the pineal gland a little more and says it's the energetic core of subtle sensations and emotions that are translated into the diverse panel of mental states, meaning the pineal gland has the ability to communicate sensations and emotions that are translated into different states of mind. So emotions go through there. And that's very important. This was not recognized by any scientific publication until late 70s, when a paper was published talking about the reduction of melatonin associated with increasing cortisol in some depressive disorders, and talking about the interrelation between the hypothalamic pituitary adrenal system. Don't worry, I'm going to tell you what this is, and the pineal gland. So now, not only the pineal gland was recognized as producing some hormone, but also that this hormone is important into the regulation of the mental status. And much later, in 2011, another paper was published, and there's still more research. Being done about this, but this, I think, was one of the first talking about showing data correlating melatonin levels with schizophrenia, bulimia, anorexia, and anxiety. So now we are talking about the hormones produced by the pineal gland that are correlated with mental disorders. So André Luiz again had told us this much earlier. So now let's go a little bit further. in two books, Evolution in Two Worlds, and here I left it in Portuguese, sorry for that, Between Earth and Heaven. It's another book by Francisco Cândido Xavier. And this book, I know now why I left it in Portuguese, because it's not translated to English yet. André Luiz gives us the notion that the mind is in command of emotions. Under the command of the mind, all cells, tissues, and organs of the physical body are integrated by the nervous system, and their functions are controlled by hormones. Again, saying that by the control of the mind, where's the mind? The mind belongs to spirit, right? So it's the spirit that commands all cells and organs of the physical body, integrating it through the nervous system and through hormones. That makes a system called neuroendocrine system. And he says about the interaction between spirit and body. This interaction is established by the mind, the spirit, that transmits the impulses of thought to the brain via the perispirit. So here's a little bit about the neuroendocrine system. Let me put all the illustrations here so that we can talk about all of them at the same time. On the right here, you see a sketch showing basically all the organs or the glands that belong to the endocrine system that produces hormones. This is all a very interactive system. Now, in the brain on the left, top left, you see a sketch of the brain with pointing to the pituitary gland, which is the gland that commands all the other glands in the body, produces hormones like the ones in the green box down there: growth hormone, prolactin, thyrotropin, gonadotropin, ACTH. Anyways, you don't want to know all of this, but these are hormones that then control all the glands in our body. The most important, I would say, for this purpose is the ACTH that activates the adrenal gland. The adrenal gland, on its own, produces cortisol, one of the hormones. It produces others, but cortisol and adrenaline. And these are called the stress hormones. So it's very important because we have the perception of something that stresses out, some thing that is frightening, some danger, and soon we have the response from the adrenal gland. How does that go so fast? Through the pituitary gland that's activated by the hypothalamus, which is a neural structure. So all this to say that that's how we get all this interaction between the brain, which is now here represented by the hypothalamus. You're going to see that it's much more complicated than that, but it's hypothalamus that activates the pituitary gland, that activates the gland, in this case adrenal gland, to produce the stress hormones and respond to any danger that we are facing. And here is again the pineal gland that produces melatonin. So this is another interesting step. But when André Luiz said that the spirit commands the mind to produce hormones that then through the nervous system, through the endocrine system, talks to the whole body to react. Dr. Candace Pert, who passed away in 2013, wrote a book in 1997 called Molecules of Emotion. She had first, before that, in 1985, she had written an article, scientific article, about the neuropeptides, the receptors forming what she called a psychosomatic network, meaning there are neurons who perceive emotions, who perceive feelings, and they translate that into neuropeptides, which are hormones originated in the brain that then spread through the body, through the blood and the body, activating organs and our whole system. So how does this neuron is activated by the mind? And this is another fascinating knowledge that Andrea Luiz brings to us. And again, we go back into Evolution in Two Worlds, that by the way was published in 1958. And he says that the neuron are called psychosomatic cells. And they have structures in the cytoplasm with don't worry about these names. I'm going to show you a sketch in the next slide. But in the cytoplasm of neurons, there are lots of structures, and some of them he describes here: the mitochondria, neurofibrils, the Golgi apparatus, melanin, and there is also an ochre pigment, and he says highly related to the spirit body and with an important function in the thoughts. The ochre pigment, observed by human science with no greater definitions, meaning science didn't give much attention to it, is known in the spirit world as the factor of fixation, as if to enclose the mind within itself, meaning it's almost like a center that keeps information, becoming denser or scarce in the human sphere, in accordance with the mental attitude of the spirit during the time it is attached to the corporeal existence. So this structure that works as a factor of fixation can become denser or scarce depending on our mental attitude during the time that we are here in the corporeal existence, meaning incarnated, because if we discarnate, we don't have the physical body, we don't have this structure anymore. But here are the cellular components. On the left, you have the sketch of a neuron with all these dendrites and all that. I'm not going to go much into that because we don't have much time. But I put on the right a much simple structure of a cell, and you can see here some of the structures that Andrea Luiz mentioned: the mitochondria, some of the Golgi apparatus, and some other structures that I'm not going to be talking much about. But this is only for you to understand. In the center there's the nucleus in like a pink, not pink, what is that? Right in the center, violet color, I would say. So that is the nucleus where the DNA and RNA is. That's where our genome, where our genetic code resides. But all in the so they are kind of inside of that bag. In the mitochondria, the cytoplasm is all this area around the nucleus, okay, out of where the DNA is. That's what I want you to kind of see. So there, in the cytoplasm, there are these structures called mitochondria. And then there was a paper published in last year, 2019, that talks about the mitochondrial genetics regulating nuclear gene expression through metabolites. Again, this is something new. This is something that is now being studied in a much broader way and is very complex. But this is just to illustrate what how we can correlate with what Andrea Luiz mentioned, the cytoplasm regulating what the nucleus, what the DNA is doing, because the genes are regulated through that interaction of metabolites, proteins that are produced by the mitochondria that goes into the nucleus, and then they can control, regulate the way the genes are expressed. So again, in Evolution in Two Worlds, this book is published in English. Andrea Luiz talks about the fluidic magnetic concentrations, and he talks about the chromosomes, the genetic matter in the nucleus, the DNA, and he says the chromosomes structured into infinitesimal granules of a physio-psychosomatic nature take part in the physical body via the nucleus of the cell, where they are kept, and in the spirit body via the cytoplasm in which the chromosomes are expressed. So they have an interaction between the cytoplasm and the nucleus. And we see here in Science that in 2011, scientists from this German research center published a paper that summarizes this concept that from the gene to proteins, the cytoplasm, the control is mainly in the cytoplasm, not the nucleus. So until some years ago, everybody thought that the cytoplasm is what gives us the characteristics of our body. Now we understand that there are more to it. It's not just the DNA, but there are cytoplasmic structures that control the nucleus. If, scientists that would read this in 1958 in Evolution in Two Worlds would say, this is not true. This is not something that we can accept. Now we see the results of research. And Evolution in Two Worlds, again and again, I apologize, but I need to read this because it's so interesting. The body inherits according to the dispositions of the mind, what they need in a determined incarnation. So, we inherit what we need to form our body for the incarnation. The heredity that will shape the physical bodies is relative but compulsory, so we must go through it. The incarnating spirits cannot change the work plan, but that they have merited or with which they have been encumbered, which depends on their acquisition and necessities. So they cannot change the whole work plan, but they can, by their own right or wrong behavior, increase or diminish the coloration of the plants that mark their route through the bioforce or units of psychosomatic force that act within the cytoplasm, projecting on the cells and consequently on the body the mental states that will ennoble or worsen their situation according to their choice or of goodwill. So it is our behavior that can shape, can modify the genes. And this is in concert with the concept of epigenetics. Epi means above in Greek, or on top of genetics. It refers to external modifications of DNA that turn genes on or off. External meaning the DNA is there, but it can turn genes on or off, meaning the genes that will work will be expressed or not. These modifications do not change the DNA sequence, but instead they affect how cells read genes. Epigenetic mechanisms regulates the activity or the expression of all the genes within the genome. So that's what André Luiz was talking about. And just to close that, we see that there is a very important role of our behavior to modify the circumstances or the characteristics of our body, either to improve health or to create disease. So we might have a genetic trait, but we may modify. And this is also in accordance with the of cause and effect. And the way that we can change, we can improve ourselves through the incarnation. And that's what we learn through Spiritism. Our transformation is so important, and our moral, our spiritual transformation to the better will be expressed in our physical body. So let's go now to the next, to the last topic that we are going to talk about in this presentation. And I'm going to talk about the triune brain. This concept, I'm going to talk first about what science has brought. And this is a concept that came about in the 60s by this very important scientist, Paul MacLean, who was the director of one of the institutes at the NIH, National Institutes of Health. And through all these studies, he came with a model that he called the triune brain model. In this model, he suggests that the human brain is organized into a hierarchy based on an evolutionary view of brain development. So you see in the illustration here that the like a representation of a lizard brain or the reptilian brain in the reptile, which is a very small brain and responsible for instincts, most of it. Then the brain of the reptilian brain during evolution got another layer or another part, which is the limbic system in mammals. And finally, only when we evolved to human species, we got the neocortex, neo meaning new. So this big part. And Paul MacLean had the idea that we had one mind in three brains. And here's a representation of the three brains coming from the bottom and represented the brain stem or the basal ganglia. And that is called the reptilian brain or primal brain. And that's where we have a expression of instincts. That's what, these early animals had, instincts. Then we go into evolving into the paleo-mammalian or emotional brain, where the limbic system was developed. And there is when we acquired the language of emotion and feeling. And finally, when we evolved into the human beings and we acquired the thoughts, we acquired free will. Only the human species has free will. So when we acquired that, we acquired reasoning, then when we develop the neocortex, which is represented by the frontal cortex, that expresses or give us the expression of language, of thought, and verbal expression. Note that in the beings that do not have the new cortex do not have the verbal expression. They have other types of expression by sounds, but not verbal like we have. So let me go back here. So Paul MacLean, when he presented this theory, when he elaborated this theory, he thought that each part of this triune brain would have its function and would work more or less independently. They would not be like interacting. So depending on what the mind would be expressing, it would go through one of these three types of structures. But this the acquisition of new technology through the technology of functional brain, MRI, magnetic resonance imaging, there were experiments showing that Paul MacLean theory was not completely accurate, because the three regions of the brain interact with one another. They do not function independently. When they use this functional brain MRI to show which parts of the brain are activated by emotions, by thoughts, by movements, they saw that there were different parts of the brain that were lighting up at the same time. So there is an interaction. It's not each part of this triune brain working alone, but there is an interaction among all of them. In the book, The Greater World, published in 1947, again, Francisco Cândido Xavier by André Luiz, Calderaro, who is the mentor, explaining to André Luiz all the wonders of the spirit world, he says the brain is the instrument that expresses the mind, which is the source of our thoughts, So, like we spiritists know, thoughts come from the spirit, not through our material brain. This is, by the way, is not accepted by science yet. Some scientists do believe and work with this concept, but we cannot say that science, as an entity, has this concept yet. So Calderaro talks about our mental house. Our mental house, he says, consists of three hierarchical compartments that interact with each other, each of these three regions of the brain. And he describes, you need to read the book because there's so much there I could not put all together here. But he describes the initial or primitive brain, where the activities of subconscious mind reside, as the first floor of our mental house. Then the motor cortex, between the frontal lobe and nerves, is responsible for the manifestations of our conscious mind. That's the second floor of our mental house. And then there's the frontal lobes, which is the most noble part of our evolving organism, where resides the sublime goals that we want to achieve through our evolution. That's the third floor of our mental house, is the superior, is the superconscious mind. So now you understand that this triune, which is actually what Calderaro is talking about here, is related to the mind communicating to different parts of the brain, but not that the brain is actually divided. And you can read a lot more of this. Again, it's so much knowledge. And these three colleagues, which I'm so proud of them, they're again doctors from the Spiritist medical doctors from the Spiritist Medical Association in Brazil. Dr. Décio Yandoli, Dr. Venia Prada, and Dr. Sergio Lopes. They wrote this magnificent book, which unfortunately is not translated to English yet, but if you read Portuguese, you can read it. The Triune Brain, the Cérebro Triuno. This is a magnificent work focused on a study of the brain at the service of the spirit. That's how they describe it. And this work is enriched by parallels established between the revelations from Spiritism and scientific knowledge. So they go from one part to another, describing the anatomy of the brain, the function of the brain, and the last part, talking about how all this is connected with the moral laws, our moral characteristics, how all this is regulated by the mind through the brain structure. This book is really a fantastic work. So much science involved, connecting with all the knowledge that we got from André Luiz through several books. So it's a must read. And so let's see. And with that, I would like to close with this quote that is my preferred quote. Spiritism, marching hand in hand with progress, will never be overthrown, because if new discoveries should demonstrate that it is an error upon a point, it would modify itself in regard to it. If a new truth is revealed, it accepts it. This is in Genesis chapter 1, item 55. So Kardec is so certain that the knowledge brought by Spiritism is true knowledge, that he has the courage to put this statement, that Spiritism would change if science would show different, would prove different from what Spiritism has brought to us. This is something that is amazing. And as a scientist myself, during all the time, I have been looking into science and Spiritism, correlating one with the other. And so far, I have never found any point that is not corroborated. I found several points that science has not achieved yet. And we are so hopeful that with science progress, we will get more points open and showing for us, for spiritists, we don't need proofs. We already know that this is truth. However, this might be important for people who need corroboration, who need something else to open their minds and understand the divine laws. So I thank you so much for bearing with me, and I thank you so much for the opportunity that you gave me to present this topic, because as I was preparing, as I'm talking, there's so much that comes to our mind. So now, in closing, I will invite you all for our final prayer. Father, Creator of the universe, we thank for all the grace you have bestowed upon us since our beginning. We recognize we are at the very early steps of our journey to perfection. And among all things, we are most grateful for the opportunities that we have been given to learn through our own experiences and through the instructions brought to us by your divine messengers. We are particularly grateful for the living examples of our Master Jesus and for the precious teachings of Spiritism that open our eyes to the wonders beyond the material world. We thank all the benevolent spirits that assisted us this morning, and we ask for them to bless all our brothers and sisters around the planet. And so be it.
Thank you, Sonia. A lot of good information. Personally, I love the quote, the last one that you brought. And I always like to use that quote when anyone comes with some new things. Oh, this is Spiritism. My answer is, okay, only science can change Spiritism. You need to have a scientific proof that something is wrong or is different to change Spiritism.
And I would like to say something there, because there are people who see, for example, the result of an experiment and says, see, Spiritism is wrong. One experiment doesn't say much. So we need science. It's different to say what scientists have said or have accepted than what science, the body of science, has accepted. So it takes many, many years for something. You see, for example, when people get the Nobel Prize, this is after 20, 30, 40 years of work. So it takes that long for this knowledge to be consolidated.
Yeah. Sometimes people are anxious when they hear something. It's already a discovery. It's already proven. Let's wait. All right. Thank you very much. Wish you a good Sunday, a good week, you and everybody else that's watching.
Thank you all very much. Have a wonderful day. Thank you immensely for this opportunity.
All right. Bye-bye.
Goodbye.